Hello peeps, Averageteadrinker here, and this is going to be one of my dungeon guide series I will be doing for the War Within Season 1. Today I'm going to guide you through the Mists of Tirna Scithe dungeon where it has had some changes since it last appeared in Shadowlands, but we'll go over all the important bits throughout the video. So right at the start of the dungeon you're going to have the overgrown roots here, which is kind of like a shortcut. It used to only be able to be opened by Night Fae Covenant players back in Shadowlands, but now in the War Within, you're able to if you're a Night Elf, both Tauren racers, Druids, and a Herbalist with at least 25 of the new Khazalgar profession. First trash pack of the dungeon, you'll have the Spike Claws, which are going to leap onto players, applying a bloodletting dot, which also has a 4-yard AoE around it. So it's worth having someone potentially stand out about 10 yards to soak these, just so you don't get mass cleaved if you're all stacked together as a group. And also, when they do die, they're going to drop a swirly, so just make sure to avoid that. Next, we have the Harvesters with two different casts to deal with. First being Harvest Essence, which is the most important as it heals the enemies and it deals AoE damage on your group, so make sure to CC and kick this. If you have any spare interrupts as well, make sure to stop that other cast Spirit Bolt, which targets random players. Next are the Soul Cleavers, who cast Soul Split on the tank, which is a pretty nasty debuff, which is a magic effect. Tanks aren't going to like this, so tanks, make sure you have a defensive rolling, and healers, make sure you dispel this as soon as you can. They also gain a buff which increases attack speed and heals them on successive hits and of throws, so make sure to help your tank kite when the mobs get this buff. Lastly, the Villager. No, not these guys. This mob can't be CC'd. It also has a frontal cast on the tank, which the tank can also sidestep. It also has a dreaded channel called Overgrowth, which means you can basically have zero fun on the pull, and if you get these back to back, I'd probably just herf out the dungeon.
Goodbye!
Joking aside, it's a heavy hitting ability which stuns you for 6 seconds, so if you see it targeted on you, you need to pop a defensive and basically just hope that you live, and hope that your other DPS are going to get you out if they care about you. Now, after you've killed this last pack, generally you'll want to skip the trash around the corner, which can be done in multiple different ways. Firstly, you can do a Warlock gateway in this spot here and you'll just fly through the terrain. If you don't have a gateway, you can Shroud or Invis part past, or if you have someone who can drop combat like a Hunter or a Mage, they can just polymorph or trap the ad on the left here. They walk past first, they wait for the group to go past as they get in combat, and then once everyone's passed, they can then just drop combat by a Feign Death or Greater Invis. As I mentioned earlier, with those able to open the routes, you can now actually open this area here and get your party some nice psychedelic and mushroom buffs. The best one I'd advise to get is the green one, as it gives a flat 10% primary stat. The last mobs before the first boss are the Bow Breakers. They're going to cast Bramble Burst, which puts a slowing bramble under your party's feet, so you just need to move or sidestep away from this. At 50% HP, they're going to start casting Furious Thrashing. I'd advise you to use a defensive for these, and generally you'll want to spread these two casts out by pushing one to 50% earlier than the other, and then just giving your time to get topped off by the healer. If they do go off at the same time, because people are just zug-zugging, then say a prayer to Green Jesus and just hope for the best. Now for Ingra Maloch and his poor Droman captive. You want to focus the Droman down to 20% to trigger the phase to increase the damage to Ingra. Whilst you're getting them down in phase 1 before this, you'll deal with the Droman's frontal, and alongside that you'll want to avoid the Tears of the Forest, which are the little blue swirlies. Eventually, Ingra will cast Repulsive Visage, which fears the party. Grammar term. Bring a shaman. Try to give yourself some space from the swirlies as they'll overlap with the fear, so just position yourself a little bit away from them. Once you get Droman down to 20%, this is where you'll want to hold and pop your longer cooldowns, as Ingra will now take 300% increased damage for 15 seconds. So this is a good spot to lust and send all your cooldowns and blast them. Just before you get to the maze here on the left, you can update the respawn point by activating the depleted seed here, which can now actually be done by anyone. The maze door mechanic comes down to one of 3 different symbol combinations you'll have in each of the areas. Here are the combos on the screen. You'll either have Lethal Flower, Circled or Uncircled, and then filled or empty. There is a weak aura, I'm going to link it in the description below. You'll want to find the unique one by standing next to each of the 4 pillars to reveal them, and then it's just one of those 3 combos you'll have to figure out alongside that. The first Mistcaller Trash you'll deal with in the maze area are the defenders, who will spawn a mist ward around them, which does ticking damage if you stand in, and it reduces damage taken for allies. So for tanks, just make sure to move the enemies out as soon as possible. They also have a knockback called Expel, so make sure if you are targeted by this, do not have your backs towards the mist ward pool. Next are the Stalkers, which you'll want to priority focus down as they cast Mistveil Bite on a party member, which is an instant heavy bleed dot on the person hit. I'd suggest use defensives on this, or if you are able to, use a bleed cleanse or bop. Next are the 2 casts you'll be dealing with. First from the Shaper, which is the Bramblethorn Coat, which is a shield on an enemy. This can be purged if you don't manage to kick this in time, because if you end up DPSing through the shield, it's going to break and then root all nearby members of your party. It can also be master spelled or dispelled if it does go on you. Next is from the Tender, who will cast a healed called Nourish the Forest. This can also be purged if it does go off, but it's kind of annoying because it goes on absolutely everyone. So you're just going to end up purging each individual mob. So I would make sure to stop this cast as a priority. Too many times I've had to do this individually, purging each one. Another mob in the maze is the Stinger, which puts a magic debuff on a party member called Anima Injection. This will explode if it times out, so if your healer is sleeping and you can't dispel yourself, you need to pop a defensive and move away from the party. Lastly, there are 1 of 3 different mini bosses you may encounter every time going through the maze. There is the Matriarchy, which has a tank buster and a frontal, and it will drop a healing pool which heals everyone inside, including players. So you want to move the mob away as quick as you can if you're the tank. Next is the Night Blossom, which also has a tank buster which can be poison dispelled, another frontal, and it will do poison swirlies you'll have to dodge. Next and lastly is the Big Frog. It will jump to nearby party members, so make sure you just move out of the big swirly. Watch out for the Tongue Lash frontal as soon as it finishes its jump, and this will always be aimed at the tank. Now that you've fought your way through the maze, you'll be fighting Mistcaller, the second boss in the dungeon, which has 2 alternating phases. In the starting phase, you'll be dealing with the dodgeball mechanic, so make sure to sidestep the lines which come from the boss, aimed at yourself and other party members. Next is Freeze Tag, which the boss is going to summon a Vulpine, which will then fixate a random party member, and if it touches any player it first comes into contact with, it's going to AoE freeze 8 yards around the person hit for 8 seconds. So at all costs, never get hit by this. Use your slows, stuns, and if you can safely DPS it down, then do it. The boss is going to cast Patty Cake, which needs to be interrupted, but this can only be done by the tank, so make sure you're paying attention. Now, the other phase, which happens at 70%, 40, and 10%, this is going to summon 4 Mistcallers. The boss is going to go immune. There's going to be a little maze minigame like you just dealt with. You want to find a unique combination, the odd one out. Make sure to pay attention to all the other mechanics still, because they go on in this phase. The phase itself also does ticking damage throughout, so I'd use defensive healing cooldowns in this. And then once you've killed the clone, you'll repeat the first phase and the second phases until the boss is dead. Now that Mistcaller is dead, the mist will go away. You will now drop down the waterfall. There is another depleted anima seed to your right as you get to the bottom, so just click on that to update your respawn location. Regarding the Spinemaw Trash coming up, you will start off with the Staghorn, which is immune to CC. It has a cast called Stimulate Resistance. You'll ideally want 2 people rotating kicks on this, because if it does go off, it's going to put a shield on all nearby enemies. It's also going to do a uninterruptible AoE cast called Volatile Acid. This is where I suggest to use defensives and healing CDs. Next are the Gorges, which are going to cast a massive green swirly underneath a player, so we recommend to use move speed increases to get yourself away. Quick thing to note is, if you do interrupt this cast before it finishes, it's just going to chain cast it back to back until it eventually finishes the cast. So unless you really can't get out the swirly and you need to interrupt this cast, I suggest to just move out. The lava, when they die, spawn a heavy ticking puddle underneath their corpse, so pay attention to the floor once they start dying. The Spinemaw Acid Gullet are going to throw out volatile acid on players, so healers, make sure to prioritize people with this debuff. And if you do have it, I'd recommend using some form of defensive just to help out. And then lastly is the Reaver, which jumps on a random player and puts a poison dot on them, which can be dispelled if you do have a poison cleanse effect. And just be wary because this can stack if you pull multiple of them. Now for the last boss, Tred'ova, hope I didn't butcher that pronunciation. It has had a few mechanical changes since Shadowlands. Firstly, you're still going to have the acid expulsion pools which you'll want to dodge, and then with each cast the boss is going to try and remember where you stood, so you'll want to move on a different direction to the direction you did previously. Try not to run around with move speed increases unless you have to dodge the swirlies, because if you're moving around like crazy, those pools are going to follow you, so all the pools are going to be spread out absolutely everywhere. Accelerated incubation will spawn 4 larvae and fixate a player. If you are targeted by this, I'd suggest to stack close underneath the boss where the tank are and melee are, just so they can AoE these down. Lastly, when they do die, they're also going to put a puddle on the floor, so tanks, feel free to move the boss around the room just to make use of the space. Mind Link now only targets the tank as well, so you'll want to run 40 yards in the opposite direction to your good old buddy tank, and you'll want to avoid being pulled in with the coalescing poison cast from the boss. You can still hit the boss on the edge of the circle if you're melee, just for better uptime. Lastly, at 70% and 40%, the boss will move to the center. It's going to gain a shield you'll have to break through to then interrupt their channel of consumption. I'd pop defenses for this cast because it does hit pretty hard. Thanks for watching this dungeon guide, and hopefully this will help you guys gain those juicy rare points come on the reset. If you did enjoy the video, type WMISS in the comment section so I know you made it this far, and give me a little like, as it all does help your boy with the old algorithm. If you want to catch me live, head over to my Twitch, and if you like the UI, then head over to the Discord, it's all for free. Special thanks to the Patreon supporters as always, and I will catch you all next time.